Keeper Lysara stood in the center of her quarters and stared at the empty containment chamber that should have held 2 sleeping dragon cubs. The reinforced glass door hung open and the security panel blinked red, showing an override code she did not recognize. Her hand started shaking as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a cold wave. Ember and Ash were gone. She pressed the emergency alert button on her wrist communicator, and within seconds alarms began shrieking through the diplomatic section of Orbital Station Zenith. The sound made her stomach twist because everyone on the station would now know what happened. A dragon keeper had lost her charges. 2 infant predators were loose on a station, housing over 10,000 beings from 200 different species. Security Chief Vorak arrived first, his blue-scaled face showing the kind of controlled panic that came from years of training. Behind him came 3 armed guards carrying stun weapons that Lysara knew would be useless against dragons, even young ones. Dragon scales were resistant to most energy weapons, and their natural fire immunity made them nearly impossible to contain once they decided to run. "When did you last see them?" Vorak asked, his voice clipped and professional. 2 hours ago, Lysara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I put them down for their afternoon rest. They were tired from morning training. I went to my study to prepare reports for the council. When I came back, the chamber was open and they were gone." Vorak examined the security panel and his expression darkened. "This is a level 7 override code," he said quietly. "Only Station Command has access to these codes. Either someone with high clearance took your cubs or someone very skilled hacked our systems." Lysara felt her legs go weak. The idea that someone might have stolen Ember and Ash deliberately was somehow worse than thinking they had simply escaped. Dragon hatchlings were worth enormous sums on the black market. Their scales could be used in advanced technology. Their genetic material was priceless to researchers, and some collectors would pay anything to own a creature so rare and powerful. "We need to lock down the station," Lysara said. "Close all docking bays. No ships leave until we find them." "Already done," Vorak replied. "I initiated full lockdown the moment your alert came through." He paused and looked at her with something like sympathy in his alien eyes. "You need to prepare yourself, Keeper. If they are in the public areas, if they encounter the wrong species, there could be casualties." Lysara knew what he meant. Dragon cubs did not understand their own strength. They could breathe small bursts of flame when frightened. Their claws were sharp enough to tear through most materials, and they moved faster than most beings could track. If someone startled them or tried to grab them, the instinct to defend themselves could be lethal. The station intercom crackled to life, and Commander Patricia Hayes' voice echoed through every corridor. "Attention all personnel. This is a code-red emergency. 2 dragon hatchlings approximately 30 centimeters in length are missing from the diplomatic quarters. These are Class A predators. Do not approach. Do not attempt to capture. If spotted, report location immediately to security and evacuate the area. I repeat, do not approach." Lysara closed her eyes as shame burned through her chest. She had been chosen for this mission because of her skill and experience. The Council of Keepers had trusted her to represent their people and their sacred bond with dragons at the first major intergalactic summit in decades. Now she had failed before the summit even began. "We need to move," Vorak said gently. "The longer they are missing, the more danger they are in. Cubs that young can injure themselves easily. They do not understand technology or how a space station works. They could wander into engine rooms, environmental systems, anywhere." Lysara nodded and followed him into the corridor. Other diplomats were emerging from their quarters looking confused and alarmed. She saw the Vrexian ambassador, a tall insect-like being with multiple arms, gesturing angrily at his aide. She caught fragments of his complaints about unsafe conditions and inadequate security. The Calter delegation, a group of crystalline beings that communicated through light pulses, were flashing urgent messages to each other. The Thorian representative, a massive, bear-like creature covered in thick fur, stopped Lysara in the hallway. His small eyes were filled with concern, not anger. "Keeper Lysara," he said in his rumbling voice, "my people have excellent tracking abilities. Please allow us to help search. We owe your people a debt for the medical assistance you provided last year." Lysara felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Ambassador Thorne," she managed to say. "Any help would be appreciated." News traveled fast on a diplomatic station. Within minutes, everyone would know. The elf keeper who lost her dragons. The security failure that put everyone at risk. The potential disaster that could derail months of careful negotiation between species who barely trusted each other. Lysara and Vorak Reached the security center where multiple screens showed different sections of the station. Officers were reviewing footage, scanning for any sign of the cubs. One officer looked up as they entered and shook his head. "Nothing yet, Keeper. We are checking all public areas, but the cubs are small. They could be hiding anywhere." "Check the service tunnels," Lysara said. "Dragons like enclosed spaces when they are frightened. They will seek out somewhere dark and warm." "Already scanning those sections," Vorak confirmed. "We have teams moving through the maintenance levels now." He pointed to a large screen showing a map of the station. "These are the areas we have cleared so far. But the station has over 300 kilometers of corridors. It will take time." How long, Lysara asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. With current resources, at least 6 hours to search the main levels. Another 12 for service areas and restricted zones. Lysara felt despair settling over her like a heavy blanket. 18 hours. The cubs would be terrified by then. They might hurt themselves trying to escape from searchers. Or worse, they might hurt someone else, and then security would have no choice but to use lethal force. Another officer called out from across the room. "We have reports coming in from the market district. Multiple witnesses claim they saw small creatures running through the vendor stalls approximately 15 minutes ago. Descriptions match the hatchlings. One witness says they were chasing each other like they were playing." Lysara felt a surge of hope mixed with fresh fear. The market district was one of the busiest areas on the station. Hundreds of beings shopping, eating, conducting business. If Ember and Ash were there frightened by crowds and noise, they could panic. But if they were playing, that meant they were not hurt or too scared. "They were just lost. I am going there," Lysara said. Vorak grabbed her arm. "You should stay here. Let security handle this." She pulled free gently but firmly. "They are my responsibility," she said. "And they know me. If anyone can calm them, it is me. You said it yourself, we need to find them before someone gets hurt. That includes my cubs." Vorak hesitated, then nodded. "Take a security escort, and Keeper, if you cannot contain them safely, we will have to use tranquilizers." Lysara did not answer because they both knew tranquilizers might not work on dragons, and even if they did, the dosage for infant dragons was unpredictable. Too little, and they would just become more agitated. Too much, and it could stop their hearts. She turned to leave, but another officer stopped her. "Keeper, wait. We just received another report." A maintenance worker in Section 7 reported hearing strange noises in the service ducts. Chirping sounds. "Like birds, but deeper." "That is them," Lysara said immediately. "Dragon hatchlings chirp when they are looking for their keeper." "Section 7, where is that?" The officer pulled up a map. "Lower engineering levels, near the plasma conduit maintenance area. It is restricted access. Most personnel would not be there on a weekend shift." Lysara felt relief flood through her. If they were in a restricted area, that meant fewer people around. Less chance of someone getting hurt, or the cubs getting more frightened. "Send teams to Section 7, she said, "but tell them to move slowly. Do not corner the cubs. Let me get there first." Vorak was already issuing orders, and within moments Lysara was running through the corridors toward the lower levels with 2 guards following close behind. She passed startled civilians who pressed against the walls when they saw her coming. A dragon keeper running meant trouble, and everyone knew it. The lift down to the engineering level seemed to take forever. Lysara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She whispered a prayer to the old gods of her people, asking for protection, for Ember and Ash, asking for a chance to make this right. When the lift doors finally opened, she ran out into a dimly lit corridor that smelled like ozone and hot metal. Somewhere ahead in the maze of tunnels and machinery, her cubs were waiting. She just hoped she could find them before something terrible happened. Casey Williams wiped the sweat from her forehead and stared at the tangle of plasma conduits she had just spent 3 hours rewiring. Her hands were covered in grease and her back ached from crawling through tight spaces. But the job was finally done. She checked her work one more time, then sealed the access panel and gathered her tools. 12 hours was a long shift even by station standards, but the weekend crew was always short-handed and someone had to keep the environmental systems running. Casey did not mind the extra hours, though. The pay was good, and working in the lower engineering levels meant she could avoid the crowds that made her uncomfortable. Down here it was just her and the hum of machinery. She was halfway to the lift when she heard the sound. It was faint at first, almost lost beneath the background noise of cooling fans and power regulators. A chirping noise like birds, but deeper and rougher. Casey stopped walking and tilted her head, listening carefully. There it was again, coming from somewhere behind the wall panels. The station had strict rules about investigating unusual sounds. Protocol said she should report it to her supervisor and let the specialist handle it. But Casey had grown up on a farm back on Earth, and she knew the sound of scared animals when she heard it. Whatever was making that noise was small and frightened and possibly hurt. She pulled out her scanner and checked for structural damage or gas leaks. Everything showed green. Whatever was back there, it was not causing any immediate danger. Casey made a decision that would later change her life in ways she could never have imagined. She knelt down and carefully opened the service hatch at the base of the wall. 2 pairs of golden eyes blinked up at her from the darkness. Casey froze. The creatures were small enough to fit in her palms, covered in scales that gleamed red and black, even in the dim light. They had tiny horns on their heads and wings folded against their backs. Their mouths were slightly open, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Dragon cubs. Casey had seen the station-wide alert that went out an hour ago. Everyone had. 2 Class A predators loose on the station. Do not approach. Extremely dangerous. She should close the hatch immediately and call security. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do, but looking at these 2 tiny creatures huddled together in the darkness, shivering and making those soft chirping sounds, Casey saw something different than what the alert described. She saw 2 babies who were lost and scared and calling for help that was not coming. The red cub took a tentative step forward and stumbled. Its legs were shaking, and Casey realized it was not just scared. It was exhausted. The black cub chirped again, this time more urgently, and tried to push its sibling back into the shadows. "Hey there," Casey said softly. "It's okay, little ones. You are safe now." The cubs froze at the sound of her voice. The red one tilted its head, studying her with those huge golden eyes. Casey slowly reached into the hatch, moving carefully so she would not startle them. Her grandmother had taught her long ago that frightened animals needed 3 things: a calm voice, gentle movements, and patience. The red cub sniffed at her hand. Its tiny nostrils flared, and then without warning it stumbled forward into her palm. The black cub chirped in alarm, but the red one made a sound somewhere between a purr and a whimper. Casey carefully scooped both cubs out of the access hatch and held them against her chest. They were cold. Much colder than they should be. Dragon scales were supposed to regulate temperature naturally, but these 2 felt like ice. Casey quickly unzipped her work jacket and tucked the cubs inside against her shirt. They immediately burrowed into the warmth, making grateful little sounds. She should call someone. She knew that. But her communicator was in her tool bag 3 meters away, and the cubs were finally settling down. Moving now might scare them again. Casey made another decision. She sat down cross-legged on the floor and held the cubs gently through her jacket. The red one poked its head out and looked up at her. Casey smiled. "You must be Ember," she said quietly, remembering the names from the alert. "And your friend there must be Ash. You 2 caused quite a scare running off like that." Ember chirped and climbed higher until her small head rested against Casey's collarbone. Ash followed more cautiously, keeping one eye on the human while pressing close to his sister. Within moments, both cubs were making soft rumbling sounds that Casey recognized as contentment. She started humming without really thinking about it. An old lullaby her grandmother used to sing when Casey was small and could not sleep. The tune was simple and repetitive, and the cubs seemed to like it. Their eyes began to droop and their bodies relaxed completely. Casey lost track of time, sitting there on the cold floor of the engineering deck. It might have been 10 minutes or 30. All she knew was that 2 scared babies needed comfort, and she could provide it. Everything else could wait. The sound of running footsteps snapped her back to reality. Casey looked up to see a tall woman with silver hair sprinting down the corridor, followed by armed security guards. The woman was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with pointed ears and violet eyes that were wide with panic. She wore robes that marked her as someone important, though Casey did not recognize the symbols. The woman skidded to a stop when she saw Casey. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the human maintenance worker sitting calmly on the floor, with 2 dragon cubs sleeping peacefully in her lap. The security guards raised their weapons, but the woman lifted her hand sharply to stop them. She approached slowly, as if walking through a dream. Her eyes were fixed on the cubs, and Casey saw tears gathering at the corners. How Casey heard the woman whisper, "How did you do this?" Casey looked down at Ember and Ash, still fast asleep and warm. "They were just scared," she said simply. "I think they got lost in the service tunnels." They were really cold, so I let them warm up. I was going to call security once they settled down, but they fell asleep pretty fast. The woman knelt down beside Casey and reached out with a trembling hand toward the cubs. Ember opened one golden eye and looked at the elf woman. For a moment, Casey worried the cub might panic, but instead Ember made a soft chirping sound and closed her eye again. "I am Keeper Lysera," the woman said. "These are my charges. My responsibility. I have trained for years to care for dragons, to understand them, to earn their trust." She looked at Casey with an expression that mixed wonder and confusion. "Yet you, a human who has never seen a dragon before, managed to calm them in minutes. How is this possible?" Casey shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I do not know about dragon training," she said. "I just know that when something is scared, it needs to feel safe. So I made them feel safe. Is that wrong?" "No," Lysara said, and her voice cracked slightly. "No, that is not wrong. That is exactly right." She reached out again and this time gently stroked Ash's scales. The black cub stirred but did not wake. Lysara laughed softly, a sound filled with relief and something else Casey could not quite name. More footsteps echoed through the corridor, and suddenly the small space was filled with people. Security officers, medical personnel, other diplomats wearing fancy clothes that looked uncomfortable. Everyone was talking at once, asking questions, demanding explanations. Casey felt overwhelmed by the sudden crowd. The cub stirred in her lap, sensing the change in atmosphere. Ember lifted her head and looked around at all the strangers. Her small body tensed, and Casey felt heat building under her jacket. The cub was getting ready to defend herself. "Everyone needs to back up," Casey said loudly. "You are scaring them." The crowd ignored her, continuing to press closer. Ash hissed, showing his tiny teeth. Smoke began to curl from Ember's nostrils. "I said back up," Casey repeated more firmly. "Now." Something in her voice cut through the noise. The security chief barked an order and the crowd retreated. The cubs relaxed again, though they remained alert, watching all the strange faces around them. Lysara looked at Casey with newfound respect. "You have a gift," she said quietly. "The cubs trust you. They feel safe with you. That is rare. That is precious." Station Commander Patricia Hayes pushed through the crowd of diplomats and security personnel until she stood directly in front of Casey. The commander was a short woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen more crises than most people could imagine. She looked at the human maintenance worker sitting on the floor with 2 dragon cubs in her lap, and her expression was impossible to read. "Stand down, all weapons," Hayes ordered. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from 30 years in command. "Everyone lower your damn guns before you spook those hatchlings and someone loses a face." The security team immediately holstered their stun weapons. The crowd grew quieter, though Casey could still hear whispers in dozens of different languages. She caught words like impossible and unprecedented and human, which made her feel even more uncomfortable than before. Hayes knelt down to be at eye level with Casey. "What is your name?" "Maintenance worker," she asked. "Casey Williams." Commander Casey replied. "Environmental Systems Technician, 3rd class." "Well, Casey Williams, you just prevented what could have been the worst diplomatic incident in this station's history." Hayes glanced at the cubs, who were now awake and watching the commander with curious eyes. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if those hatchlings had been cornered by armed security?" Casey shook her head. "I just knew they were scared," she said. "Seemed wrong to let them stay that way when I could help." Hayes studied Casey for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Simple answer. I like that." She stood up and addressed the crowd. "Everyone except essential personnel clear this area now. That means all of you." She pointed at a group of diplomats who were recording the scene on their personal devices. "And delete those recordings. This is a security matter, not entertainment." The Vrexian ambassador stepped forward, all 4 of his arms crossed. "Commander Hayes, we have a right to document this incident. The safety protocols on this station are clearly insufficient if predators can escape and wander freely." "The predators are found," Ambassador Hayes replied coolly. "No one was harmed. Protocol worked exactly as designed. Now, unless you want to be the reason those cubs get agitated again, I suggest you leave." The ambassador opened his mouth to argue, but Lysera stood up smoothly. "Ambassador," she said in a voice like silk over steel, "the commander is correct. Too many people will distress Ember and Ash. If you wish to file a complaint about station security, you may do so through proper channels. But right now you are putting everyone in danger by remaining here." The Vrexian ambassador looked like he wanted to argue more, but several other diplomats were already leaving. He made an annoyed clicking sound and stalked away with his entourage following. Within minutes, the corridor was nearly empty. Only Hayes, Lysara Vorak, and 2 security guards remained. Casey felt like she could breathe again, though the cubs were still watching everyone carefully. Lysara knelt beside Casey once more. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the cubs. "I need to examine them to make sure they are not injured." Casey nodded and carefully began to lift Ember from her lap. The red cub chirped in protest and tried to burrow back into Casey's jacket. "They might be more comfortable if you let me hold them while you check," Casey suggested. "They seem pretty attached right now." Lysara smiled, though there was something sad in her expression. "You are right, of course." She reached out and gently ran her hands over Ember, checking for injuries. The cub tolerated the examination but kept her golden eyes fixed on Casey as if afraid the human might disappear. "No wounds," Lysara said with relief. "She is cold and probably hungry but otherwise healthy." She moved to check Ash, who was more cooperative than his sister. "He is the same. They have been running and hiding for hours. They must be exhausted." "How did they get out?" Casey asked. "The alert said they were in a secure containment area." Lysara's expression darkened. "Someone used an override code to open their chamber. We do not know who yet or why. It could have been a theft attempt or sabotage. Station security is investigating." Vorak stepped forward. "The hatchlings are safe now," he said. "That is what matters. But we need to transport them back to the diplomatic quarters, and that presents a problem." He looked at the cubs, then at Casey. "They are clearly bonded to this human. If we try to separate them, there could be a violent reaction." "You want me to come along?" Casey asked, surprised. "If you are willing," Hayes said. "We need to get those cubs back to their quarters fed and rested. You seem to be the only person they trust right now besides their keeper. Your presence might keep them calm during the transfer." Casey thought about her shift that technically ended 2 hours ago. She thought about her tiny quarters where she had planned to eat instant noodles and watch old Earth movies. She looked down at Ember and Ash, who were pressed against her like she was the only solid thing in a chaotic universe. "Okay," she said. "I will help." The walk back to the diplomatic quarters was slow and careful. Casey carried both cubs in her arms while Lysara walked beside her, speaking softly in a language Casey did not recognize. The cubs seemed to respond to Lysara's voice, relaxing slightly, though they never took their eyes off Casey. They passed through several security checkpoints where officers stared openly at the sight of a maintenance worker carrying dragon hatchlings, like they were ordinary pets. Word had clearly spread because several off-duty personnel came to see the human who tamed predators. A young Kalter diplomat made of living crystal approached them in one corridor. His light pulses were translated by a device on his chest. "Forgive my curiosity, but I must ask, how did you know the hatchlings would not harm you?" Casey thought about it. "I did not know," she admitted. "I just figured they needed help more than I needed to stay safe. Sometimes you have to take a risk for the right reasons." The Kaltor pulsed in a pattern that the translator rendered as profound wisdom. He bowed slightly, then moved aside to let them pass. When they finally reached Lysara's quarters, Casey saw that the place was beautiful. Plants she did not recognize grew in crystalline pots. Tapestries covered the walls showing dragons, in flight over mountains that looked nothing like Earth. The containment chamber, in the corner, now had additional security panels installed. Lysara gestured to a soft cushioned area near a heat lamp. "Please sit," she said. "Let them warm up properly and I will prepare food." Casey sat down and the cubs immediately curled up in her lap, seeking the warm spot under the lamp. Ember made a contented sound and Ash yawned, showing all his tiny teeth. Casey found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. Lysara returned with 2 bowls of what looked like raw meat, mixed with some kind of glowing liquid. She set them down and the cubs scrambled toward the food, chirping excitedly. They ate like they were starving, which they probably were. While the cubs ate, Lysara sat beside Casey. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Casey looked at her confused. "For what?" "For assuming humans were too primitive to understand dragons. For believing that only my people who have bonded with dragons for thousands of years could truly connect with them. You proved me wrong in the most beautiful way possible." "I did not do anything special," Casey protested. "I just treated them like they mattered." "That is exactly what makes it special," Lysara replied. "Most species in the galaxy have forgotten that simple truth. We have protocols and procedures and scientific methods for everything. But sometimes the most important thing is just to care without expecting anything in return. The cubs finished eating and waddled back to Casey, climbing into her lap again. They were warm now, their scales radiating heat from the lamp and the food. Ember nuzzled against Casey's hand, and Ash made a purring sound that vibrated through his whole body. Hayes, who had been standing quietly near the door, spoke up. "Miss Williams, I think you should take a few days off. Paid leave. You have earned it after today." Casey nodded, though she felt strangely reluctant to leave the cubs. "Will they be okay?" she asked Lysara. "They will be safe here now," Lysara assured her. "The security has been upgraded, and I will not leave them alone again until we find out who tried to take them." But she paused and looked at Casey hopefully. "Perhaps you would like to visit them. The cubs clearly enjoy your company, and it would help them settle after their ordeal." Casey felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that," she said. As she carefully extracted herself from the sleeping cubs and prepared to leave, Casey realized something important had changed. She had come to this station looking for work and stability. She had found something much more valuable. She had found a purpose and a connection that crossed species and culture and everything that usually divided people in the galaxy. She looked back one more time before leaving. Lysara was sitting with the cubs, stroking their scales and humming a melody that sounded almost like the lullaby Casey had sung earlier. The keeper looked up and smiled, and Casey smiled back. Sometimes the universe put you exactly where you needed to be, even if you did not know it yet. Casey woke up the next morning to find her communicator flooded with messages. 37 to be exact. She rubbed her eyes and scrolled through them, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as she read. Half were from coworkers congratulating her on being famous. The other half were from people she had never met asking for interviews or pictures or autographs. She pulled up the station news feed and her stomach dropped. The top story showed a blurry image of her sitting on the floor holding the dragon cubs. The headline read, "Human Maintenance Worker Solves Crisis That Baffled Security." Below that was another article titled "The Dragon Whisperer," and a third that asked, "Are humans the key to interspecies understanding?" Casey groaned and buried her face in her pillow. She did not want to be famous. She just wanted to go back to work and maybe visit the cubs like Lysara had suggested. Being the center of attention made her skin crawl. Her communicator buzzed again. This time it was Commander Hayes. "Report to my office at 0900 hours. That is an order, not a request." Casey arrived at the commander's office exactly on time, wearing her cleanest work uniform. Hayes was sitting behind a desk covered in data pads and looked like she had not slept. The dark circles under her eyes suggested she had been dealing with the fallout from yesterday all night. "Sit down," Williams, Hayes said, without looking up from the report she was reading. Casey sat and waited while the commander finished whatever she was working on. Finally, Hayes set the pad aside and fixed Casey with a tired stare. "Do you know how many requests I have received in the last 12 hours, Hayes asked. 216. News agencies wanting to interview you. Diplomats wanting to meet you. 3 different universities offering to fund research into human-animal bonding. And one very insistent Kaltor businessman who wants to hire you as some kind of interspecies consultant for an absurd amount of money." Casey felt her face go hot. "I am sorry, Commander," she said. "I did not mean to cause problems." Hayes waved her hand dismissively. "You did not cause anything. You solved a problem that could have gotten people killed. But now you are a symbol whether you like it or not. The human who succeeded where advanced technology and trained experts failed. Do you understand what that means politically?" Casey shook her head. "It means every species on this station is suddenly very interested in humans," Hayes explained. "We have been the new kids in the galactic community for less than 5 years. Most species still see us as primitive, but you just demonstrated something they cannot explain with their science or their protocols. You connected with creatures that their best specialists struggle to handle. That scares some of them and excites others." "What do you want me to do?" Casey asked. Hayes leaned back in her chair. "I want you to keep doing your job. Keep being yourself. But I also need you to understand that people are going to treat you differently now. Some will want to use you for their own purposes. Others will resent you for making them look bad. You need to be careful about who you trust." "What about Lysara?" Casey asked. "Can I still visit the cubs?" Hayes smiled for the first time that morning. "Lysara has been calling me every hour asking when you will come back. Apparently the cubs have not eaten properly since you left. They just sit by the door and chirp. So yes, you can visit them. In fact, I think you should. Casey felt relief wash over her. When can I go? As soon as we are done here. But Williams, one more thing. Hayes' expression turned serious again. Security is still investigating who opened that containment chamber. We have narrowed it down to 3 people with access to level 7 codes, but we do not have proof yet. Until we catch whoever did this, you need to be on your guard. Someone wanted those cubs and they might still want them. Casey felt a chill run down her spine. Do you think they will try again? I think desperate people do desperate things, Hayes said. Just be aware of your surroundings and report anything suspicious. Understood. Yes, Commander, Casey said. When Casey arrived at the diplomatic quarters, she found Lysara pacing outside her door, looking worried. The moment the elf woman saw Casey, her face lit up with relief. Thank the old gods you are here, Lysara said, grabbing Casey's hands. The cubs will not eat. They will not sleep. They just keep looking for you. I am sorry, Casey said. I did not know they would react like that. It is not your fault, Lysara assured her. Dragons bond quickly, especially young ones. They imprinted on you yesterday. To them you are family now. She opened the door and gestured for Casey to enter. The moment Casey stepped inside, both cubs scrambled toward her from across the room. Ember reached her first, climbing up Casey's leg with her tiny claws. Ash was right behind, making excited chirping sounds. Casey knelt down and let them swarm over her, laughing as they nuzzled against her face and hands. I missed you too, she said softly. The cubs made happy rumbling sounds and pressed closer. Lysara watched with a mixture of joy and sadness on her face. They have never bonded with anyone except me before, she said quietly. Even my assistants back home cannot get close to them. But with you, it is like they have known you their whole lives. Casey looked up at Lysara. Is that a problem? No, Lysara said quickly. No, it is wonderful. But it is also unusual. Dragon cubs are very selective about who they trust. It takes months, sometimes years, to build that kind of bond. You did it in minutes. Maybe they just knew I wanted to help, Casey suggested. Animals can sense that kind of thing. Perhaps, Lysara said, though she sounded unconvinced. Or perhaps there is something about humans that we do not yet understand. Something that allows you to connect with other species in ways we cannot. Before Casey could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Lysara opened it to find Ambassador Thorn, the massive bear-like Thorian, standing in the hallway. Behind him were 2 members of his delegation. Keeper Lysara Thorn rumbled in his deep voice. And Miss Williams. Forgive the intrusion, but I have information that may be important. My people have been conducting our own investigation into the security breach. Please come in, Lysara said, stepping aside. Thorn had to duck to fit through the doorway. He looked at Casey holding the 2 cubs, and his small eyes crinkled with warmth. They are fortunate to have found you, he said. Then his expression turned serious. We have discovered who opened the containment chamber. Who, Lysara demanded. A technician named Victor Moss Thorn replied. Human like Miss Williams here. He has been working on the station for 8 months in the communications department. We found evidence that he was being paid by a collector on the Outer Rim, someone who wanted young dragons for private ownership. Casey felt sick. Another human did this, she said quietly. Thorn nodded. Station security is moving to arrest him now. But there is more. Moss has been monitoring communications, including yours, Miss Williams. He knows you have bonded with the cubs. Our intelligence suggests he may try to use that connection somehow. Use it how Lysara asked, her voice tight with worry. We are not certain, Thorn admitted. But a dragon cub that trusts a human could be easier to transport than one that fights every step of the way. You must both be careful. The cubs seemed to sense the tension in the room. They pressed closer to Casey, making anxious sounds. She stroked their scales, trying to calm them while her mind raced. Someone had tried to steal Ember and Ash. Someone human, which made it worse somehow. And now that person knew about her. I will assign guards to your quarters, Thorn said to Lysara. And Miss Williams, you should consider staying here until Moss is in custody. You will be safer with the cubs than alone in your quarters. Casey looked at Lysara, who nodded immediately. Please stay, she said. I would feel better knowing you are here. And the cubs will certainly be happier. Okay, Casey agreed. She realized she was shaking slightly. Ember climbed higher onto her shoulder and nuzzled against her neck, making comforting sounds. Thorn left to coordinate with security, and Lysara locked the door behind him. She turned to Casey and tried to smile, though worry was clear on her face. It will be all right, she said. We will catch this Moss person, and then everything can return to normal. but Casey wondered if anything would ever be normal again. She had come to this station looking for a simple life doing simple work. Now she was caught up in attempted kidnapping and illegal trade and political tension between species, all because she decided to help two scared babies. Ash climbed into her lap and looked up at her with those huge golden eyes. He chirped softly as if asking if everything was okay. Casey took a deep breath and smiled at him. "It will be fine," she told him, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I promise I will keep you safe." But even as she said it, Casey knew that promises were easier to make than to keep. Somewhere on the station, a man named Victor Moss was planning something, and whatever it was, it involved her and the cubs she had come to care about deeply. She held Ember and Ash close and hoped that when the time came, she would be strong enough to protect them. Casey spent the rest of the day in Lysera's quarters playing with the cubs and trying not to think about Victor Moss. Ember and Ash were full of energy now that she was back racing around the room and play fighting with each other. They would tumble across the floor in a tangle of wings and tails, then scramble back to Casey for reassurance before starting again. Lysera watched them with a smile while preparing their evening meal. "You are good with them," she said. "Have you worked with animals before?" "I grew up on a farm," Casey replied. "We had chickens, pigs, a few cows. My grandmother taught me how to care for them. She always said animals are not so different from people. They want food safety and someone who treats them with respect." "Your grandmother sounds wise," Lysera said. She set down 2 bowls of meat, and the cubs pounced on them immediately. "Among my people we have a saying. The truest bond is not forged through dominance but through understanding. You understand that instinctively?" Before Casey could respond, her communicator buzzed. It was Commander Hayes. "Security has attempted to apprehend Victor Moss. He evaded capture and is currently somewhere on the station. All personnel are advised to remain in secure locations until further notice." Casey felt her blood run cold. "He got away," she said aloud. Lysera read the message over her shoulder and immediately moved to the door, checking that all the locks were engaged. "The Thorian guards are still outside," she said. "We are safe here." But Casey could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. She looked at the cubs who had stopped eating and were staring at the door. Their scales had darkened slightly and small wisps of smoke curled from Ember's nostrils. They sensed danger too. Hours passed slowly. Lysera tried to keep conversation light, but the tension in the room was thick. Casey sat with the cubs who refused to leave her side. Every sound in the corridor made them all jump. Every footstep could be Moss coming for them. It was almost midnight when the lights went out. The entire quarters plunged into darkness. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately, but nothing happened. Casey heard Lysera moving quickly through the room. "Stay calm," Lysera said. "This could be a station-wide power failure, or it could be him," Casey whispered. She pulled the cubs closer, feeling their hearts beating fast against her chest. The door control panel beeped once, then went silent. Someone was trying to override the locks. Lysera moved to stand in front of Casey and the cubs. She spoke words in her ancient language and her hands began to glow with soft blue light. Casey had heard that some elves could use magic, but seeing it was something different entirely. The door slid open. A figure stood silhouetted against the dim emergency lights in the corridor. It was a man of average height holding some kind of device in his hands. Behind him, the 2 Thorian guards lay unconscious on the floor. "Victor Moss, I presume," Lysera said coldly. The glow around her hands intensified. Moss stepped into the room and Casey got her first clear look at him. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with nervous eyes and hands that shook slightly. He did not look like a criminal. He looked scared. "I do not want to hurt anyone," Moss said, his voice cracking. "I just need the cubs. I am in debt, bad debt, the kind that gets you killed if you do not pay. The collector will give me enough credits to disappear, start over somewhere safe." "So you thought stealing dragon hatchlings was the answer," Lysera said. "Do you have any idea what you have done? Dragons are sacred to my people. Taking them is not just theft, it is an act of war. I did not have a choice," Moss said desperately. "You do not understand. These people, they will kill me." He raised the device in his hands and Casey saw it was some kind of stun weapon. "Please just let me take them. No one else has to get hurt." The cubs hissed in unison and Ember spread her small wings, making herself look bigger. Ash bared his teeth and growled a sound far too deep for such a small creature. Casey felt heat building under their scales. They were getting ready to defend themselves. "You are not taking them." Casey said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I will not let you. Moss looked at her and something like regret crossed his face. I am sorry, he said. I really am. But I do not have a choice. He aimed the stun weapon at Lysara. Move aside or I will drop you where you stand. Lysara did not move. The glow around her hands grew brighter. If you fire that weapon, she said, you will not live to regret it. For a moment, no one moved. The standoff stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Then Moss made his decision. His finger tightened on the trigger. 3 things happened at once. Lysara threw her hands forward and a wall of shimmering blue energy erupted between them and Moss. The stun bolt hit the barrier and dissipated harmlessly. At the same moment, Ember took a deep breath and exhaled a small stream of fire that shot past Lysara's shield and caught Moss on the arm. He screamed and dropped the weapon. Before he could recover, Casey launched herself forward. She was not a fighter. She had never been in a real fight in her life. But she was angry and scared, and she was not going to let anyone hurt her friends. She hit Moss in the chest with her shoulder, and they both went down hard. Moss tried to push her off, but Casey was stronger than she looked. Years of manual labor had given her muscle that did not show. She pinned his arms and yelled for help at the top of her lungs. The Thorian guards burst through the door, already awake and furious. They had been stunned, but not for long. Thorn himself was right behind them. He took one look at the scene and roared with rage. His massive hands grabbed Moss and lifted him off the floor like he weighed nothing. You dare attack under my watch, Thorn bellowed. You harm those I have sworn to protect. He shook Moss like a rag doll. You will answer for this. Station security arrived moments later along with Commander Hayes. They took Moss into custody, though he could barely stand. The burn on his arm from Ember's fire would need medical attention, but no one seemed in a hurry to provide it. Hayes looked at Casey, who was still sitting on the floor, breathing hard. The cubs had rushed over and were checking her for injuries, their small paws patting her face and arms. You all right, Williams? Hayes asked. Casey nodded. I think so. She looked at Lysara, who was leaning against the wall, looking exhausted. The blue glow had faded from her hands. Are you okay? I will recover, Lysara said. Using magic takes energy, but I will be fine thanks to you and Ember. She smiled at the red cub, who chirped proudly. Hayes ordered more guards to be posted and technicians to repair the power systems Moss had sabotaged. She assured them that Moss would face serious charges both from station authorities and from the Elven government. Attempting to steal dragon cubs carried penalties that made Casey wince when she heard them. After everyone left and the quarters were secured again, Lysara made tea. They sat together in silence for a while, watching the cubs who were finally settling down after all the excitement. Ember curled up in Casey's lap and Ash leaned against Lysara's leg. You saved us today, Lysara said quietly. Both you and Ember. If you had not acted when you did, Moss might have succeeded. We are a team, Casey said. All of us. She stroked Ember's scales and the cub purred. Besides, I could not let him take them. They are family now. Lysara smiled and there were tears in her eyes. Yes, she said, they are. And so are you, Casey Williams. You have proven yourself not just to the cubs, but to me and to my people. When we return home, I will recommend to the council that you be named an honorary keeper. It is the highest honor we can give to someone outside our race. Casey felt overwhelmed. I do not know what to say. Say you will visit us, Lysara replied. Say you will continue to be part of these little ones' lives as they grow. Dragons live for centuries. You could be their friend for your entire life. I would like that, Casey said. I would like that very much. They sat together as the station slowly returned to normal around them. Outside the window, stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, other species were going about their lives thinking humans were primitive and simple. But Casey knew better now. She knew that sometimes the simplest actions were the most powerful, that kindness could bridge any gap, that love did not require advanced technology or ancient wisdom. It just required the courage to care. Ember yawned and stretched, then settled deeper into Casey's lap. Ash made a sleepy sound and closed his eyes. Lysara hummed softly a lullaby from her home world, and Casey felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. She had come to this station looking for work. She had found something far more valuable. She had found purpose, connection, and family, and she had learned that being human was not about being primitive or advanced. It was about recognizing that every living being deserved compassion, and having the courage to offer it even when it was difficult. The cubs slept peacefully, and Casey knew that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. Human, elf, and dragon united by bonds stronger than any difference between them. That was the real lesson. That was what the galaxy needed to understand, and somehow Casey had become the one to teach it.